Paris, July 17, 1794. The crowd gathers before dawn. The guillotine stands upright in the Place du Trône Renversé, its blade clean, its mechanism tested. The French Republic is at war on every frontier. Prussia presses from the east. Austria advances through the Low Countries. Britain controls the seas. Inside France, rebellion smolders in the Vendée. The government believes it is surrounded by enemies, foreign and domestic. Today, 16 Carmelite nuns will die. They are accused not of espionage, not of armed rebellion, not of conspiracy with invading armies, but of religious fanaticism and refusal to submit fully to revolutionary authority. In the logic of the moment, that is enough. As the carts roll forward, the stakes extend far beyond a convent. The French Revolution itself hangs in the balance. Fear governs policy. Suspicion replaces law. The state is devouring its own foundations. Within 10 days, the architect of this system will fall. But on this morning, power appears absolute. To understand how 16 cloistered women became a threat to the French Republic, we must step back into the collapsing world of 18th century France. By 1789, the Kingdom of France under Louis XVI faced structural crisis. Decades of war, especially support for the American Revolution, had crippled royal finances. Taxation was unequal. Nobility and clergy enjoyed exemptions. The peasantry bore the burden. Grain shortages and rising bread prices fueled unrest. Enlightenment ideas questioned divine right, monarchy and clerical privilege. When the Estates General convened in May 1789, it was meant to stabilize the kingdom's finances. Instead, it ignited a political revolution. The National Assembly abolished feudal privileges. Church lands were nationalized to back revolutionary currency, the assignats. The civil constitution of the clergy in 1790 forced priests and religious orders to swear loyalty to the state over Rome. This was not a minor administrative change. It was a direct confrontation with centuries of Catholic authority. France fractured. Many clergy took the oath. Many refused. Those who refused, called refractory priests, were seen as potential counter-revolutionaries. Religion, once a pillar of royal legitimacy, became suspect in the new order. The Carmelite nuns of Compiègne belonged to a contemplative order. They lived in prayer and silence, detached from politics. Yet in revolutionary France, neutrality was no protection. In 1792, the monarchy fell. Louis XVI was suspended, later tried and executed in January 1793. The First French Republic was proclaimed. War intensified. Austria and Prussia sought to restore monarchy. Britain joined the coalition. Internally, royalist uprisings erupted, most violently in the Vendée. The revolution radicalized. Power shifted to the Committee of Public Safety, dominated by figures like Maximilien Robespierre. Emergency powers expanded. Surveillance networks spread. Revolutionary tribunals accelerated prosecutions. The law of suspects in 1793 broadened the definition of enemy of the people. Suspicion became a weapon. Economic pressure worsened the climate. Inflation from assignats eroded purchasing power. Urban workers demanded price controls. The government imposed the law of the maximum to regulate essential goods. Enforcement required coercion. Coercion required fear. The reign of terror was not chaotic violence. It was state policy. Against this backdrop, religious communities faced dissolution. Monastic vows were deemed incompatible with republican citizenship. Convents were closed. Religious orders were suppressed. Members were ordered to return to civilian life. The Carmelite nuns of Compiègne complied outwardly with dispersal orders. They left their convent. They lived in small groups, but they continued communal prayer privately. They refused to renounce their vocation. In ordinary times, this would have been an internal church matter. In 1794, it was interpreted as political defiance. Why? Because the revolutionary government feared invisible networks. The Vendée uprising had shown how religion could mobilize armed resistance. Foreign monarchies used Catholic solidarity as propaganda. The Republic viewed any organized spiritual allegiance outside state control as potential sedition. The nuns were accused of fanaticism and of maintaining counter-revolutionary correspondence. Evidence was thin, but the tribunal required only moral certainty, not legal rigor. They were transferred to Paris. By mid-1794, the terror had reached its peak intensity. The law of 22 prairial streamlined executions. Trials were brief. Defense was limited. Acquittal rates plummeted. The revolutionary tribunal operated with speed. On July 17, 1794, the 16 nuns were condemned to death. Their execution was public. Eyewitness accounts, carefully recorded and later examined by historians, describe composure rather than hysteria. They reportedly sang hymns as they approached the scaffold. One by one they were executed. No armed revolt followed, no hidden conspiracy was uncovered. 16 lives ended under the blade, yet this event resonated far beyond its immediate victims. Because something shifted in Paris that summer. The terror had originally been justified as a necessary defense against invasion and internal treason. But by mid-1794, France's military situation had improved. Republican armies were stabilizing fronts. The existential threat was receding. And yet executions accelerated. Members of the convention began to fear for their own survival. The machinery of suspicion spared no faction indefinitely. Political alliances were fragile. Yesterday's patriot could become tomorrow's traitor. The execution of visibly pious, non-violent women did not alone topple the terror, but it symbolized its excess. When the state begins executing those whose threat is intangible, has expanded beyond control. 10 days later, on July 27, 1794, 9 Thermidor, Maximilien Robespierre was arrested. The following day, he was executed by the same guillotine. The terror collapsed almost overnight. Was there a direct causal link between the Nuns' execution and Robespierre's fall? Historians caution against oversimplification. The Thermidorian reaction resulted from accumulated political rivalries, fear within the convention, and strategic coordination among moderates. But timing matters. The crescendo of executions in July intensified elite panic. Power had become unpredictable. In revolutionary systems, legitimacy depends on perceived necessity. Once violence appears detached from survival, it erodes its own justification. The French Republic did not collapse after Thermidor. It recalibrated. The Committee of Public Safety lost dominance. The pace of executions slowed dramatically. The Constitution of 1795 established the Directory, a more conservative regime emphasizing stability over ideological purity. But the deeper transformation extended further. The revolution permanently altered France's political architecture. Feudal privileges were gone. Church lands remained nationalized. Secular authority dominated governance. Religious orders would not regain their pre-1789 status. The execution of the Carmelite nuns illustrates a structural tension within revolutionary states, the drive to centralize loyalty. In monarchies, religion legitimized power. In the Republic, independent religious allegiance threatened sovereignty. The guillotine was not merely punishment, it was a signal. It signaled that the state claimed ultimate authority over conscience. Yet by asserting absolute ideological control, the revolutionary government exposed its vulnerability. When fear governs too broadly, it alienates moderates and destabilizes coalitions. Internal cohesion weakens faster than external threats. France would continue to experience instability. The Directory, then the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who consolidated power in 1799. Military success abroad compensated for political fragmentation at home. The Revolutionary Wars reshaped Europe. Monarchies adapted. Nationalism accelerated. But the terror left an enduring lesson in political history. Emergency powers can preserve a state under siege. They can also consume it. The 16 nuns were not generals. They commanded no armies. They controlled no trade networks. Yet their execution occurred at the intersection of ideology, war, and sovereignty. The revolution feared not their weapons, but their refusal to redefine loyalty. In the end, their deaths did not reverse secularization. They did not restore monarchy. They did not end anti-clerical policy. But they became part of the moral reckoning that followed Thermidor, a quiet reminder that revolutions risk devouring principles in pursuit of survival. The blade fell 16 times that day. 10 days later, it fell again, this time on one of the revolution's chief architects. Power had shifted. The French Republic endured. The Bourbon monarchy did not immediately return. Europe would spend 2 decades in near-constant war as Napoleonic armies redrew borders and exported revolutionary principles. But July 1794 marked a psychological inflection point. The terror demonstrated that when a state defines dissent too broadly, it transforms suspicion into instability. And instability, even in revolutionary regimes, invites correction from within. The execution of the 16 Carmelite nuns was not the largest atrocity of the revolution, but it crystallized a moment when ideological absolutism reached its sharpest edge, just before it turned inward. History does not remember them as military threats. It remembers them as a sign that the balance of power had tipped too far. And in that imbalance, the fate of the revolution itself began to change. When the carts left the Place du Trène Renversé on July 17, 1794, the Revolutionary Tribunal had done what it had done thousands of times before. Condemn, execute, proceed. Yet in the corridors of the National Convention, anxiety was reaching a breaking point. By mid-1794, France's military situation had improved dramatically. The Army of the North had secured key victories against Austrian forces. The external coalition still threatened, but the immediate spectre of invasion that had justified extraordinary repression was fading. The Republic was no longer fighting for mere survival. It was fighting for advantage, and that distinction changed everything. The terror had been rationalized as emergency governance, centralized power in the hands of the Committee of Public Safety to defeat enemies on all fronts. Under Maximilien Robespierre and his allies, surveillance expanded, revolutionary tribunals accelerated, and ideological conformity became the benchmark of loyalty. But emergency measures depend on a shared perception of necessity. When that necessity weakens, fear turns inward. The Law of 22 Prairial, enacted in June 1794, stripped defendants of meaningful defense and narrowed trial outcomes to acquittal or death. Convictions soared. Executions in Paris surged. Deputies in the Convention, many of whom had once supported harsh measures, began to realize they were no longer immune. The revolution had entered a phase where past service offered no protection. The execution of the Carmelite nuns must be understood within this crescendo. They were not uniquely targeted among religious victims. Thousands of clergy had faced persecution, deportation, or execution since 1794. The symbolism of killing cloistered women for spiritual steadfastness sharpened perceptions that repression had detached from concrete security threats. Political systems rely on calibrated coercion. Excess disrupts equilibrium. Inside the convention, rival factions, former radicals, pragmatic administrators, and deputies fearful for their own lives began coordinating. They did not necessarily oppose the Republic, they opposed unpredictability. On the 9th Thermidor year 2 and July 27, 1794, Robespierre was denounced on the convention floor. The momentum shifted rapidly. Arrest followed. The next day, he and his closest allies were executed. The same mechanism, the same blade. The Thermidorian reaction did not restore the monarchy. It did not reinstate Catholic dominance. It recalibrated revolutionary governance away from ideological absolutism and toward institutional stabilization. Executions plummeted. The Committee of Public Safety was weakened. Political clubs were closed. The Jacobin influence receded. The revolution transitioned from moral purification to pragmatic survival. In geopolitical terms, France remained at war. The military machine built during the Terror continued to function. Mass conscription, the levée en masse, had transformed warfare by mobilizing society at scale. Command structures had been reorganized around merit rather than aristocratic birth. These reforms endured beyond the fall of the Terror's architects. This continuity is critical. The Terror did not dismantle France's war capacity. It centralized and intensified it. After Thermidor, the military apparatus remained intact, but political oversight diversified. Economic pressures, however, persisted. Inflation destabilized urban centers. Black markets flourished. The Directory, established under the Constitution of 1795, struggled with corruption and factionalism. Royalist plots resurfaced. Radical uprisings reemerged. The revolution had destroyed the old regime. It had not yet built a stable replacement. Amid this instability, one institution gained relative strength: the army. Military success abroad offered legitimacy at home. Generals became political assets. Among them was Napoleon Bonaparte, whose Italian campaign victories enhanced his reputation as both strategist and stabilizer. By 1799, amid Directory dysfunction, Bonaparte seized power in a coup. The consulate followed, later the empire. The French Revolution had begun as a struggle over taxation, representation, and sovereignty. It evolved into ideological purification. It then transitioned into military expansion under centralized executive authority. Where do the 16 nuns fit within this arc? They represent a moment when revolutionary governance tested the limits of coercion against conscience. Their execution highlighted the unresolved tension between ideological unity and pluralistic tolerance. From a political systems perspective, revolutionary regimes face a structural dilemma. To consolidate power quickly, they often narrow definitions of loyalty. But as external threats recede, such narrow definitions create internal fragility. The French Republic survived because it adapted. Thermidor signaled that even radical revolutions contain self-correcting mechanisms when elite survival becomes endangered. Deputies who had endorsed harsh measures reversed course when they perceived systemic risk to themselves and the state's legitimacy. The execution of the Carmelite nuns did not cause this pivot alone, but it formed part of the climate that made continued escalation untenable. In broader European context, the revolution transformed the continent. Feudal hierarchies were challenged, nationalism intensified, secular governance expanded. The Catholic Church lost immense property and political leverage in France. Concordats and compromises would later redefine church-state relations under Napoleon, but the ancient regime model was irretrievable. The nuns' deaths therefore occurred at the intersection of two historical forces, the dismantling of clerical political authority and the radicalization of emergency governance. Their fate underscores a larger geopolitical lesson. When states face existential threats, they often centralize authority and suppress alternative loyalties. But if suppression extends beyond demonstrable threats into symbolic purification, it risks delegitimizing the very sovereignty it seeks to protect. France in 1794 stood at that edge. The blade that silenced 16 religious women also signaled that the revolution's definition of danger had expanded to abstraction. 10 days later, abstraction became liability. Power shifted. In the centuries since, the execution of the Carmelite nuns has been interpreted through religious, political, and moral lenses. But stripped of later canonization narratives and cultural memory, the historical core remains stark. A revolutionary government, under intense pressure, chose ideological uniformity over limited tolerance at a moment when strategic necessity was already diminishing. That choice contributed to elite fear. Elite fear produced Thermidor. Thermidor reshaped the revolution's trajectory. The French state emerged secular, centralized, and permanently transformed. Europe entered an era of mass warfare and nationalist awakening. The balance of power shifted repeatedly, culminating in the Napoleonic reordering of borders. Yet the July morning in 1794 remains a microcosm of a universal truth in political history. Revolutions promise liberation, but survival often demands coercion, and when coercion loses proportionality, it endangers the revolution itself. The guillotine at the Place du Trône Renversé was an instrument of policy, not chaos. It functioned with bureaucratic precision. Its victims varied: aristocrats, peasants, politicians, clergy. On that day it claimed 16 Carmelite nuns. Their execution did not halt the revolution, but it illuminated its most dangerous inflection point, when ideological certainty eclipsed strategic restraint. In that tension between conviction and survival lies the enduring lesson. Empires fall when they cannot adapt. Revolutions falter when they cannot moderate. France in 1794 stood on that precipice, and for a brief, chilling moment, the balance of power hinged not on armies or borders, but on how far a state was willing to go to command belief.